Are you guys ready to do a weird experiment? Great, because the monster we're talking about this week is super weird and experimental. When talking about genies in D&D, the first thing that comes to mind is obviously gonna be the 4 elemental genies we all know and love that have been in the game since the 70s. If you're a D&D genie scholar, you might even think of the Kahai or the Karashi, which were both introduced in 3rd edition and have both received their own video and stat block update. But did you know that there are no less than a dozen other genies in Dungeons & Dragons? Today we're gonna take a trip back in time to look at one of the weirdest monster groups ever introduced to the game and take a crack at bringing them over to 5th edition without going completely insane. Our journey starts in 1992 with the release of Al-Qadim, Land of Fate. Land of Fate was a 2nd edition box set that introduced a brand new region to the Forgotten Realms far to the south. Drawing inspiration from the likes of 1001 Nights and historical events in the Arabian Peninsula, Al-Qadim was a massively ambitious setting whose influence is still felt by Dungeons & Dragons to this day. Now when it comes to genies, they are extremely prominent, and in an effort to expand on the 4 basic genies, Al-Qadim would introduce a bunch of new genie or genie-related creatures, and this is where Tasked Genies come from. Tasked Genies are mentioned in both the box set and the campaign book, Arabian Adventures, which released alongside it, though they are actually given stats in the Al-Qadim Monstrous Compendium, which, as the name suggests, was a compendium of monsters, also released in 1992 alongside the box set and the adventure book. Essentially, a tasked genie is a genie of any kind who has done the same task over and over again for so long that their form has literally changed to reflect this task, as have their magical abilities. Theoretically, a tasked genie can be hyper-fixated on any task you can think of, ranging from blacksmithing to playing music to digging tunnels or even waging warfare. The task in question can be extremely wide or narrow in scope. For example, a tasked genie might simply be a blacksmith who makes all manner of metal objects in their forge. Or they could be a blacksmith who specifically creates weapons. Or they might be a blacksmith who only makes long swords. You can get as specific as you want with this, ending up with a blacksmith who only forges long swords made of silver with adamantine hilts and emeralds set in the pommel if you want. But the point is, they have a task and they are usually exceptionally good at that task. And I mean, if you're doing the same thing every day for over 100 years, you should be. Now there are 2 ways you can actually stat out a creature like this. The first is to simply have a tasked genie stat block that acts as a sort of chassis for its other abilities, which would be related to the specific task that that genie is fixated on. The second way is to create a theoretically endless amount of stat blocks for each possible task a genie might have. Al-Qadim chose the latter. In the 1992 Al-Qadim Monster Appendix, we have Architect Genies, Artist Genies, Guardian Genies, Herdsman Genies, Slayer Genies, Warmonger Genies, and my personal favorite, the Winemaker Genies. Why do their snoots look like that? No one knows. This is a pretty solid baseline for some common tasked genies, which you might come across. However, there are more where that came from. In 1993, 3 adventures set in the Land of Fate would be released: Secrets of the Lamp, City of Delight, and Assassin Mountain, all of which contain 2 more tasked genies each. From Secrets of the Lamp, we get the Messenger and Miner genies, from City of Delights, we get the Administrator and Harem Servant genies, and from Assassin Mountain, we get the Deceiver and Oathbinder genies. The only other time after this tasked genies would see the pages of a D&D book would be in 1994 within the Monstrous Compendium Annual Volume 1. Unfortunately, there were no new genies added, but the Administrator, Deceiver, Harem Servant, Messenger, Miner, and Oathbinder genies would all appear again with some new art from the legendary Tony DeTurlizzi, so that's fun. Now, I feel like a lot of these task genies are pretty self-explanatory in terms of what they actually do. You don't need me to explain to you what a winemaker genie does. However, there are a couple in there that need a bit of explanation. Oathbinder genies are kind of like the inevitables from Mechanus in a way, though instead of upholding cosmic law, they uphold agreements made between 2 creatures. Usually one of those creatures is a lord, which the genie serves, and the other is a petitioner, but that isn't necessarily the case. The other one that I feel needs a bit of explanation is the harem servant. Harem in this case is referring to the family dwelling of a wealthy lord, and these genies are individuals who serve as entertainers, assistants, and bodyguards, so think of them as butlers who know how to fight and play the harp. It's also worth noting that the difference between the Slayer and Warmonger tasked genies is that Warmongers are soldiers and battlefield commanders, while Slayers are straight up murder guys who have the task of killing other creatures. Slayer genies are also somewhat unique in the world of tasked genies on account of the fact that any tasked genie can become a Slayer genie given enough time. See, tasked genies don't just enjoy their vocation, but the act of fulfilling this task is a very part of their being. A painter must paint, a miner must mine, and a warmonger must continue to seek conquest. They will never willingly stop doing their task, and if prevented from doing their task by force, the genie suffers both mentally and physically. They will become malaised and depressed, and their body will gradually grow sickly. If held back from doing their work for too long, they can even go mad. And when a tasked genie goes mad, they transform into a Slayer genie, and the result is always violence against everyone that crosses their path until the genie is slain. This is a fate that all tasked genies fear, and fortunately it is a rare occurrence. There are very few creatures powerful enough to keep a tasked genie from pursuing their work, and those who are powerful enough to do so often know better. Now, the other big question related to these guys is, who are they working for? As masters of their respective craft, a tasked genie's skills are in extremely high demand. Some of them will simply get a job working for whoever can pay them the most, which is usually a noble genie of some kind, though other tasked genies may choose to serve less wealthy nobles or even mortals if they are getting something out of it beyond material wealth. Usually this means that the genie is being granted access to tools or resources that afford them the ability to push their craft even further. A warmonger genie, for example, might take up arms to lead the armies of a lesser mortal king simply for the challenge of leading warriors to victory over a superior opponent. A messenger genie may choose to work under the employment of a government that is constantly sending communications over long distances, enabling them to stretch their legs and fulfill their purpose with daily deliveries. Or in some cases, the genie may be forced into service by an oppressive ruler or powerful spellcaster who is able to dominate them in one way or another. However, it should be noted that when forced to work against their will, a tasked genie will always produce inferior work, almost as a form of malicious compliance, which is honestly heroic of them. Like, they obviously still want to be pursuing their task, but if they are being forced to do it, they just won't push forth their best effort because they're unwilling to provide that for someone they presumably hate. It's also worth considering that no matter what the genie's task is, they all have to start somewhere. In the case of an artist, they don't just start out drawing masterpiece after masterpiece, and while it might take them a century or more to fully master their art, it would probably go a lot faster if they just signed up for Artwad. Artwad is a super cool website that teaches you how to draw, and they are the sponsor of this week's video. Being able to draw is a skill which eludes me entirely. I have tried a bunch of times throughout my life to improve, and I can never seem to get it. At least that was true until I tried Artwad. This website is like Duolingo for learning art. They have managed to gamify the process of learning fundamentals in a way that actually helps you learn to draw without feeling like a constant slog. The lessons are easy to understand, practical, and most importantly, they're really fun. When you sign up for Artwad, the website asks you a few questions about your goals, experience, how much time you want to commit each week to learning, and what your roadblocks might be. It takes literally a minute to get set up, and then just like that, you're in the first lesson. The lessons all follow a roadmap progression, so you can literally see how far you've come, which is awesome, especially if you're like me, because I just love to see data in a visual format. I only heard about this website because they reached out about sponsoring a video, but after using it for myself, I am genuinely stoked to keep going and see how far I can go. Currently, Artwad is running a huge discount on their yearly plans, and you can use my link in the description down below to get 30% off on their premium plan right now, which, if you have any interest in starting the process of learning to draw or just improving on what skills you already know, that's a squeal of a deal. Thank you so much to Artwad for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to talking about genies. Converting Tasked Genies into 5e ended up being a task in and of itself. By the time I realized how huge of a commitment this was gonna be, it was already way too late. My brain couldn't stop thinking about it. My vision was to create a single Tasked Genie stat block to work almost like a reverse template. Instead of applying the template to other creatures like you might do with the Half Dragon in the 5e 2014 Monster Manual, it would serve as a creature that you could assign specific abilities to that were related to the genie's task. So that's what I did. Fair warning, this is about to get very crunchy. My Tasked Genie stat block is simple. They have a 20 in every stat, which I will explain in a minute, a fly speed, magic resistance, a scimitar attack, and a ranged magic attack that is all in line with their CR, and that CR being 9. They also have the wishes trait that all 5e genies have, but with the added stipulation that any wish they grant must be related to the genie's chosen vocation if they can even grant wishes in the first place. So that's all pretty basic, and this is where we get into the weeds. I gave the Tasked Genie a trait called Apex of Vocation. This trait is the real meat of this creature. The goal here was to have a trait that could give you a bunch of variations on the same stat block without needing a dozen different creatures to fill in all the potential niches a Tasked Genie might fulfill. So Apex of Vocation states the genie must choose one of the following 5 options, those options being Artisan, Assassin, Craftsman, Musician, and Warrior. Each of these 5 choices is meant to serve as a broad archetype that will give the genie a suite of appropriate abilities. The Artisan and the Craftsman both gain proficiency with a set of tools associated with their vocation and have advantage anytime they make a check with those tools. In the 2024 rules, all the tools have a specific list of things you can do with them and their related skills, so basically, you just need to choose a tool relative to the genie's craft. A carpenter, for example, would choose carpenter's tools. A brewer would choose brewing supplies, etc. The Artisan also gains the ability to cast Mirror Image, Polymorph, and Stone Shape once per day, and the Craftsman gains the ability to cast Creation once per day, but with an infinite duration. The Musician path gives the genie proficiency in Performance, all musical instruments, and allows them to cast Calm Emotions, Irresistible Dance, Thunderwave, and Vicious Mockery. The Warrior option gives the genie an extra attack, a higher armor class, and proficiency in Athletics and History, and Perception, as well as a permanent casting of Magic Weapon on any magic weapon that they are holding in their hand. I guess it's a normal weapon, but then when they hold it, it becomes a magic weapon. You get the idea. And the Assassin track gives the genie Cunning Action and all the rogue skills, along with a bump to their speed and some extra poison damage on their weapon attacks. This trait also contains the rules for how the genie might go mad if kept from completing its work, and it specifies that the genie has expertise in any skill or tool it is proficient with. And this is why all their stats are the same number. Because the genie has a pretty diverse potential pool for proficiencies, you don't have to do any annoying math this way. Basically, if the genie is proficient at something, that means it also has expertise, which means it has a plus 13 on the roll. That's it. This does mean that their stats are on the higher side, but I didn't give them proficiency in any saving throws because that would cause the numbers to get somewhat inflated, so their solid core stats make up for that fact as well, while keeping their multitude of skills easy to swap between. I also just gave them proficiency with Persuasion because that felt appropriate for a genie to have, and it gives them a single skill with the modifier already filled in, so you don't have to remember that they get a plus 13, you can just reference the one skill they already have. Now, is this perfect? Definitely not. I'm sure there are some of you who wish this was less granular, and I'm sure there are some of you who wish it was actually just 16 different stat blocks with their own unique abilities. There are some obvious gaps here too, like say a Tasked Genie healer. However, using what we've already established, I bet you could make a healer Tasked Genie pretty quickly. I would just give them proficiency in medicine, maybe insight too, and then give them a few healing spells. Done. My primary goal here was to create something simple to use, and I think I did that, but honestly, I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this. Please take a look at the stat block and let me know if there's anything you would add or change. It might just be the case that the best way to do this is to create a ton of different stat blocks after all. But like I said, we're doing an experiment. Now, all of that said, the main reason I wanted to talk about these genies was because of the sheer depth of lore surrounding them and the ways you can use that in a game. So, let's get into some plot hooks. There are literally hundreds of ways you can use a Tasked Genie, maybe even thousands. At their most basic, a Tasked Genie can make for an interesting NPC to encounter while the party is doing some shopping in a major city. I also like the idea of a Tasked Genie being somewhere far off and inaccessible, working a trade that the party wants access to for one reason or another. Maybe there's a blacksmith who is said to make the finest magic blades in the realm, but he is a genie who lives atop a mountain somewhere dangerous, and the only way you can get to him is by crossing through a horrific landscape, and he will gift a blade to you if you're brave enough to get there. A Tasked Genie can also make for a fantastic antagonist if placed in the role where their task is directly at odds with the players and their goal. Perhaps a Tasked Genie who is leading the army of a rival kingdom is threatening to steamroll the village where the adventuring party is from, so they need to band together and take him down. Tale as old as time, but with genies. Or perhaps the genie is an ally to the party. They could be an architect who is in the process of building a fantastic monument which is meant to serve as the genie's masterpiece, but in order to finish it, the genie requires a rare and obscure element or object, with the promise of a substantial reward upon its delivery. You can also have a Tasked Genie show up as something of a random encounter in an old abandoned location. This was actually the idea that convinced me to convert these guys, because just imagine the players are adventuring through an ancient mine shaft and they come across a miner genie who has been continuing to dig out the space beneath the mountain despite the fact that the people who once lived here are all dead or gone. Or maybe they come across an ancient abandoned ruin that just has horseshoes everywhere, and when they track them to the point of origin, they find a tasked blacksmith genie working on an anvil beside a mountain of horseshoes. The people may be long gone from these places, but for the genie, their work just continues as normal. This might even be a good way to incorporate a Slayer genie who used to be a winemaker or something, or maybe even a guardian to the king, but they failed in their duty and have since been left to go insane within the bowels of the kingdom's ruin. But however you choose to use this monster, as always, linked in the description down below is my 5e conversion of this creature, which can be found in the form of a Google document. I'm very curious to know what you guys think about this one, and also please let me know in the comments what other tasked genies you could think of, or different jobs or vocations that a genie might fall into that could make for an interesting character. Also, over on the Dungeon Dad Patreon is my way of saying thank you so much to those of you who support me there. You can find the high-res PDF version of the stat block, which contains all the same information, but is in a fancier, schmancier format. That's my way of saying thank you. Speaking of patrons, it's time for Patron of the Week. Thank you so much to Devilish Delight for your fiendish amount of support. It means the most. And thank you for watching. If there's a monster from a previous edition of Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, some other role-playing game, or whatever, and you'd like to see it show up on the show, let me know in the comments down below or in the Dungeon Dad Discord, and who knows, you might just see it show up on a future episode of Monster of the Week. As always, I just want to thank you guys so much for all of your support, for watching these videos, for liking them, commenting, all that stuff. And if you're not subscribed to the channel already, please consider doing so. It helps me out a crazy amount, and then you know you won't miss a future episode, which next week we're getting into some more weird stuff. We're doing a lot of weird videos lately, so if you're just coming to the channel now, welcome. This is a weird time to come in, but I'm glad you're here. Anyways, that's all I got for you this week. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Till then.